Welcome back to Tac Visor, OverWatch League podcast. Today we are going over week 15 of the OverWatch League. Rather exciting week. We'll go ahead, we will break down the previous matches. There were just like all the weeks in catch-up mode, quite a few, so we'll go all over those. We will give our predictions for the May Melee that's going to be happening and do like a little bracket since we missed out on March Madness. We'll do a little March Madness bracket. We got a little bit of flavor there. So lots of storylines, lots of moving around over the past couple weeks, and this week was no exception. And I'm ready to jump in if you are.
I am. I have my good friend Caffeine over here. So,
Hey,
mine's better though. I mean,
I do like the Diet Dr. Peppers. This
right.
is the first full flavor pop that I've had in like 3 months.
I couldn't do a regular soda ever again, I don't
It's
think.
so sweet. I do
It
have my water too, Water Champion.
tears you up, or at least it does me anyway.
Yeah, no, I feel
But
you.
no, aside from that, I'm ready to go. A lot to unpack. It was these matches were just so busy, so much in them. It was insane.
Yeah, and some unforeseen outcomes also here. It definitely the last couple of weeks. I mean, it's been an interesting few weeks with in professional sports, physical contact sports. Generally, the better team wins, and it's fairly easy. But that's wasn't necessarily the case for the past couple weeks. And in esports, it seems like when you get rolling over a team, you can roll over some of the better teams, as we saw last week with Shanghai and Seoul. And then, speaking of Seoul, we see them lose to the second worst team in the league.
Um,
I mean, you got
Close.
Vancouver right now at the very
I
bottom.
mean, well, if you're talking roster, it depends.
Yeah.
Actually, either way, the Hunters are not at the very, very bottom. They're at 17 out of 20. Um, and they
Who do
don't
they
have as
have?
bad of a map differential as other teams that are below them. So
Yeah. Um, I think that Washington, with the pickups that they have, are gonna end up being a better team than the Hunters. I don't. So I do agree. Well, and I actually forgot about Boston. So
how can you forget? Oh, well, they're forgettable.
yeah, sorry.
Uh,
Oh well, actually, well, we'll get into that too. But speaking of Hunter Soul, I mean, this is a 3-0. I mean, we did not expect this to happen. What was your takeaway from this?
uh, my big takeaway, now the first, I should say there were two big takeaways. The first one for me was going into it. The more I looked at it, they did have an interesting coaching challenge. The Dynasty did. No Tracer, and you're taking out the Arissa that they had utilized kind of the week before, along with the Winston, and had their own different type of comp. But with those types of bands in the hero pool, it was honestly an interesting approach of, okay, who's going to play? In this instance, it was the Sombra. Was it going to be Fitz? Was it going to be Prophet? Because we saw Fitz have incredible success the week before against the Dragons on the Sombra early while the Tracer was being utilized by Prophet. And then eventually Prophet took the Sombra so that we could see Fitz on the McCree and the
Mm-hmm.
Hanzo. And so it was kind of with that hero, that set specifically, who do we give the Sombra to? Who's going to have better momentum and better familiarity from the week before to help us have success? And then what was going to be the complement to, we knew that we would still see Gesture on the Winston. What was going to be the complement to that? So I felt like that coaching change was going to be the big challenge for the Dynasty, but I felt like it would be one that they could easily overcome because of their skilled DPS, and at least Jester would have some consistency. But then my second takeaway, which came from watching the match, the Hunters finally decided this is our comp that we are going to run, and we're going to stick with it. We saw them run the Sombra with the 76, and then we saw them with the Wrecking Ball dive.
Mm-hmm.
They actually played a uniform way for once, and it really benefited their play because they could just have more confidence going into each engagement. And like we even saw it in later engagements where there was a 99-99 flip, and we just see Leave. And this was before he even switched to the 76. They also ran the Echo too with the Sombra. He came in with Echo, duplicated McCree, and got close to 2 Deadeyes in one go, which flipped that 99-99 engagement into their favor to get that round 1 win to basically cap the map.
Yeah, the wrecking ball is definitely important to how the hunters want to play. They want to get on you fast. They want to dive and they want you to make mistakes. That's their whole game. They want to get on you fast and force you to make mistakes. And that's exactly what Seoul did. They made mistakes. I mean, we saw the hunters, like you said, they were sticking with that dive, with that wrecking ball, either way, attack or defend. That it didn't matter. They said this is our identity. This is how we play, and this is what we're gonna do. And it just didn't matter. Even on Gibraltar and things, they just played better. For Seoul, their ult usage was really bad. This is directly, I think, because of how the hunters were playing. Their dive comp is always forcing these strange ults to try to win the team fights. They were ulting weird, and it just wasn't winning team fights. And Prophet is obviously we've seen him pop off and be one of the better hit scan, even just overall DPS heroes in the league, but he's not getting the support that he needs to do that. You're not getting any positioning, you can't take these shots that you're used to shooting. You have no time because that ball is on you and there's no one to stop him.
Excuse me. And no, you're absolutely right. And it was kind of something that we saw early on, really. In the first map on Nepal, there was just not enough healing output. It seemed like, and I don't know if it was due to the positioning, but I felt it was more of the hero choices. And then when we saw Budosin eventually switch over to the Zen, I felt like it better benefited. But then we saw him switch to the Bat, and then the healing got better, but all the DPS was coming from the support. It was coming from Budosin, who we finally saw somebody actually turn Baptiste into a very lethal DPS complement.
Yeah.
For the first time in a while, if at all, ever, really.
Yeah,
it was just very weird hero choices was my big takeaway.
It
was a mess.
And with that, I mean, I think part of the damage, or lacking of damage from Seoul too, was they had 2 counters to Echo. They have a McCree with Fitz, and they had Torbjorn on Prophet, and that was a little bit later in the match where they went with that, and it still wasn't working. You have a hit scan, and then you have an auto just whenever he gets close enough, he's dead, and that's a pretty wide range that turret has, and they still weren't able to counter just the one Echo on the other side. And it's not like the hunters have been playing lights out with their DPS players, so I was a little taken back by the poor play from Seoul. I thought if there was a match for them to reclaim their identity and really say we're here, they would have 3-0'd the hunters as they should have. This team is just so volatile right now. I mean, they go off and they lose 3 in a row or 4 in a row or whatever, and then they beat Shanghai, playing excellently, and then they lose to I'm gonna say the 3rd worst team in the league, because I think the Justice are slightly better than them, but just an overall really poor showing from them.
Yeah, and my biggest concern, and now first, before I get to my concern that lies with the dynasty, let's give credit to Jinmu, who most of us associate with that heavy damage output splash hero, specifically his Pharah. He's one of the best Pharahs in the league, but we've seen him play Junkrat rather effectively. And we've started to see him switch over to these flanking characters, and he outplayed Prophet on Sombra pretty much the whole match. He had a better EMP utilization. He followed up his own EMPs with hacks, as we saw other Sombras start doing in the league. And he was just a better complement to make sure that he was creating opportunities for Leave on the Soldier to get those easy picks on the squishies, put out a lot of damage on the tanks, and really put the dynasty on their heels. So Jinmu deserves a lot of credit and they don't really get enough of that, the DPS for the hunters, mostly because we focus so much on their tank play because we know Among is a world class tank player, especially on Wrecking Ball.
Yeah, yeah,
But
I agree.
my concern is the biggest hero that was missing really for the dynasty from the previous week was the Tracer. We all know Prophet is arguably the best Tracer in the world. It comes down to, say Byobi and then probably Prophet, depending on who you ask and what the scenario is. You can't be that dependent on that hero if that is really what the factor was for not only not getting a map win, like not even getting the win. They didn't even get a map win. They got 3-0'd, which we thought the dynasty was going to do to the Hunters based off what we
Yeah.
saw the week before. If you're that dependent on a hero, then going forward, that's going to make you very, very predictable in things like this Melee this weekend coming up, and then going into the playoffs at the end of the year. Even though you'll have all these heroes available, if you're that dependent on one, everyone knows that's what you're going to pick. And they'll plan on countering that when they match up against you. And then just knowing, well, whatever else they pick after this, it's in the bag. They can't play it, apparently.
Yeah. All right. Well, our second match of the morning, since they started at such an early time, those poor casters, was Shanghai and London. This one went about a little worse, I guess, than we thought. I know we'd had a little bit higher hopes for London. So we know how Shanghai plays. What do you think was the deciding factor here for London and why they couldn't really get it together?
Honestly, I think it started with Lip and Fleta. They've been last week we saw them kind of struggling with who's going to play what hero, how they were going to space to complement one another, and who's going to sit back with the tanks, who's going to go out into the flank, who's going to make the first step in aggression. And that was even with using a character like Sombra, who is primarily a flanker. But we've seen Fleta, we've seen use the Sombra in a more DPS focused way where she's using that submachine gun a lot more. But I feel like them actually playing a little better complement wise caused a lot of problems for the Spitfire. They couldn't get set because of the constant pressure from the hacks from Fleta, so that Lip could go in with the McCree and just start mowing people down. And he made the whole Torb turret completely ineffective.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, especially with Fearless's Rhine, which was a surprise for me, like how well he positioned. I didn't think it would be that flawless. And this is probably the third time we've seen them switch up their main tanks, and it's still not using Gaguri in any way.
Right. I would love to see
even with switching, these main tanks, the role a lot and keeping Void in there. We're not seeing much of a fall off what we've seen with other people switching out their main tank. They tend to struggle. The defense isn't there, or the support to create an attack isn't there. So I felt like that's where it started, was with the DPS play from Shanghai.
Do you think Shanghai's the deepest team in the league?
I have to say that they are the deepest team in the league. When you've got you can run reasonable. They've got 5 DPS that can play. What hero can't they play? That's DPS, and that's not just amongst 5 of them.
Yeah, the hero locks don't even matter to them.
What one of them can't play any of those heroes? Like we've seen. I mean, my goodness, where do you even start? Look at the Pharah. We've seen Fleta play Pharah just as good as Ding at times. We've seen Lit playing McCree flashes as good, if not better, than Diem. And it's so you don't really have to worry about your DPS. Your tank, again, you've only really played 3 of them, and you got 2 more on your bench there. And you don't even really need to worry about your support. You've run pretty much the same duo pairing there, and it's working. So even though you got that depth of support too, why mess with the synergy? Yeah,
and I'm glad you brought up Shanghai's tanks, especially. I know we talk about their DPS and their really can play anyone, but it's partly because those tanks are playing so well and getting them in such good position, and it doesn't matter what they're playing. We saw them play the full dive. I mean, a full dive composition and just absolutely kill it. They were getting picks first, and all of London was crumbling. They were separating them off. There was several times during their dive comp where I watched London be split in half, 3-3, and people in the middle for Shanghai, and there's no recovering from that, especially if you've got two healers on one side, a tank and two DPS on the other. Shanghai's just going to swarm around, and they also play double shield. So they played double shield with the Ryan and Sig, and London still couldn't hang no matter what they tried. So London, I've been really hard on JMac here the last couple weeks because he looks confused as to what hero he wants to play. So I've seen him switch a couple times in the middle of the map, which is generally what we see DPS players do, not tank players. So he's switching around. He doesn't know if he wants to play the Winston. He doesn't know if he wants to play the Wrecking Ball. Sometimes he's on a shield tank. So this happens, and I don't know if it's coaching choices. It very well could be, and I would assume it's coming from them. But he looks confused. Get this man onto a tank that he can comfortably play and allow him to get his DPS into a position to make plays. Otherwise, it's going to be a long season for London.
Yeah, and honestly, it seems like as of right now, his go-to tank is Orisa, and we only got to see it. How terrible does it have to be if you're if you're of any of these heroes for London that got banned? But you come back after about a month off. You get that week with your best heroes. You have some success. You show some flashes against a team that was better than you. And then you don't have those heroes available the next week, and then you just get rolled.
Again.
And that's when you get into the whole thing of you need to have more depth at your hero pool.
Exactly.
And that's what the whole purpose of the hero pool that they're running as far as the bans.
This is what they want to happen. Yeah.
Exactly.
So the next match was a little surprising in the score to me with NYXL and Spark. I thought this might be a little bit closer than it ended up being. I think that we both called this one.
We both called 3-1.
Yeah.
And that's what it was.
Yeah, we both called this one. But so things that I thought was very strange, things that we don't see from NYXL. And I know we had talked about wanting to see them experiment more early in the match, and they did. So they stuck with the dive comp, even on defense. That's not generally how we see NYXL play, and it works. So there was these very close fights where you get a pick over here, a pick over here, a pick over here, and all of a sudden you're in these 3-on-3 team fights. NYXL loses a lot of those. They were winning them here. They were making plays and using smart ults even when a match or a team fight seemed lost. They lost 2 people. They picked a person. All of a sudden you're on a 4v5, but they would use ults to take that team fight or force ults out of the Spark. So I thought that their ult economy was very good. But the improvement on losing these close fights is so instrumental, especially when you're playing these good teams. Spark has been playing very well and still played very well. This was still a close match, even though it was 3-1. It very easily could have went 3-2 or 3-1 the other way. It was very close maps that the NYXL was winning, and I like to see that from them because we've seen them so many times lose these fights where we feel like they should be the superior team.
And at times we really have. But honestly, looking at the last 3 maps, for me, it wasn't really that close until we reached Blizzard World. For me, Blizzard World and Busan were the closest. Busan was the first map, and that was, the Spark took it. And really, it wasn't poor play from NYXL. It was great play from Spark, which it's still weird that that's the case. Usually, you'll see a team slip up and, it's just kind of, oh, well, of course the other team's going to win just because this team messed up. This really wasn't messing up. We just saw Godsby specifically. His McCree was phenomenal. He was getting picks on Libero's Echo constantly in the early map. And then, we'd try to see, SBB, he would try to go around on the Sombra, get that hack, and prevent him from being able to at least roll away and get better positioning. Couldn't do it. Gosby was just dictating almost every encounter of that map. But then we saw, Anubis roll around, and NYXL just kicked it up a notch. And the dive comp from them looks frightening to me if you're any other team. The speed with which they played, they shored up the little things that, because it was just little things that cost them that map the first time. They shored those up. They dictated every first encounter and just started to roll through. And it just started to seem like the gap was widening as the match went on. And Libero just established himself as arguably the best Echo in the league. He's right up there with Rascal. I heard the casters say that it was far and away Libero. I can't give that to him yet, but he did phenomenal. His duplications of Gujwe's Rhine, the timing with which he would duplicate, and then how fast he'd get that Earth Shatter up and set up these
two
times. And he was setting up shatters like we were used to seeing Mono set up for Mecco to capitalize on as Diva. That's how good these were. He was getting 4 and 5. One time he even got all 6. So maybe that's the answer for some of these fights going forward, is using the Echo. But for me, whether or not they use Echo is perfectly fine, because the style with which they were playing, as far as making sure that there was just enough distance that the attackers could still get support, so that they could drop back, let the tanks move forward, create new avenues of attack, or just establish a line of defense, depending on what side of the map attack or map point you're on. Just everything about their positioning and the shaping of each encounter was just, that was what my big takeaway from this match was, is that the NYXL have started to really shore up some things, which we thought was a concern after last week, because the Charge were just exposing their spacing, and now it seems like they've shored that up.
Yeah, and it was obviously against a very good team. The Spark, their ult usage, especially on that first map when they won, their ult usage was perfect. They didn't waste anything. Their ult economy, there were so many fights where they were going in with 4 or more ults after they had already won a team fight, not using any. And NYXL had, used some ults or maybe had just won in a dry one and didn't win, but they were winning that ult economy. And in those later fights and later matches, it's so important to have those ults online and to have that little bit of an extra push to win you that last or second to last team fight, because those are so important. So I was very happy with both teams there. Those are two very good teams that we're going to be talking about quite a bit throughout the season, because the Spark have really hit my watch list here. Two teams that are not on my watch list played next in Houston and Vancouver. I was very happy to finally see my dude Linkser start the match. I don't care if they only played him to start because of how terrible Vancouver is. He was clicking heads, man. That's what he does. He is one of the best sniper players in the league at just clicking heads. It's all he does. It's all he can do. And it's still, he was playing Ashe. He was taking out support players before they could even make it to the fight. So I was very happy to see him. Hydration was looking really good on main tank, actually. He really was. Now, I know, obviously, against basically platinum level players, but... And really, the only thing I want to say about Vancouver, they won some fights I didn't think they were going to. I think they were much improved from last weekend. So I think they did play better. I still think Shredlock is actually playing at a decently high level. But their character choices didn't really make any sense either. Like, they kept running the Soldier over an Ashe or a McCree. I don't know if they just don't like those ults for spacing. Maybe they like Soldier's ult. But Ashe and McCree have two of the best spacing ults in the game. So I don't know why you would want to use those. And the Soldier was just getting picked off by Linkser. There wasn't anything they could do. I don't know if they thought the extra mobility, the extra healing, which tells me they don't have any faith in their healers, and they shouldn't. But I just, it wasn't a fun match to watch, except for Linkser.
I, before I get to my points, I find it funny how one week you're all Dante, 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 and then the next you're Links. Like you can't make up your
No, no,
mind.
no. I thought
The more
Dante would be
important
the
DPS
no.
between the two of them.
I thought,
And who
well,
you're more
Linkser
excited
doesn't
to see
start.
play.
Linkser, so I love watching Dante play. I said in the last podcast that he would be the player of the match. I think it was Linkser.
No,
Yeah,
I actually don't know if you said a player of the match.
I
My
did.
big thing was you said that
I
you would
said
be
it
talking
under my
about.
breath as and I was like, Dante, player of the match. And we went on.
I must have missed that because I do
Yeah.
know you said if Dante were on any other team, he's MVP of the league.
Oh,
Which
yeah.
which I thought was a far stretch, but I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
he does have the
He was
skill
on a
set
better
for it.
team. He as Sombra, and even as Tracer. But
Yeah.
this week it was the Linkser show.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, for me, it was kind of just the DPS for Houston show.
Sure.
And I'm gonna say that I'm gonna throw hydration in there because up until this season, hydration's always been a DPS character.
Mm-hmm.
He was really well known for his Bastion play over in LA with the Gladiators. And like that was just something that he loved to do. He and Surefour would trade off on it, and the other would switch to, whatever hit scan was needed. So he has a pretty deep hero pool too that he doesn't get credit for.
Yeah.
But I felt like the way he was playing Reinhardt, which was surprising, first of all. The way he was playing Reinhardt a little bit more aggressively, almost kind of bumper-esque, if I would say, but with better shield timing. Like he would go in, high damage output, initiate the fights, and then the moment that the defense would drop for the Titans and they'd start to go on the attack, shield up, and then he just let Linkser and Dante go to work. And Linkser, yes, early on, especially the first map and a half, I should say, because when Volskaya came around the back half on the Outlaws attack, Dante just started to take over with his Echo play. His Sig alts were incredible, and he was accreting better than even Meko was, and we've seen Meko get multiple and even literal multi-kills with the accretion usage. And that's what we saw Dante doing and building up gravitic fluxes to cap points or flip fights to, flip the point. And it was their DPS play was just absolutely solid. To your thing about the soldier, though, for the Titans, I felt like it was honestly more they wanted that for the shield break.
Okay.
Just because you've got a Reinhardt, you got a Sigma, and the Sigma shield has a little less health than Reinhardt's, and it's usually pulled down by the tank player a little more often because it's used more strategically than the Reinhardt shield, even though they all have their own strategies. You see that shield being moved around a lot more based on where they're trying to move, how they're trying to dictate the fight. Whereas Reinhardt's is where it is where it is. It's only got one point that it can be, and that's whichever way the player turns. So I think that them knowing that it was a higher mobility shield that would be moving around a lot would just leave one shield to focus on. And we've seen soldiers, melt plenty of Rhine shields in the past. I felt like it was more for that. And then hoping by taking down that shield, you continue to have the high damage output to counter somebody like Lynx or like Dante, especially Dante, because Soldier's a good pick against those high mobility aerial characters like Mercy, Pharah, and now Echo. But to your point, it didn't really make sense with how those heroes were being played. They were being played so efficiently that you would probably rather have somebody. Honestly, a Widow would have been good to see, I think. Now, since we didn't see a Widow, we didn't see an Ashe, that tells me that they don't have a very deep DPS hero roster. Yep. And maybe there's something to the healing thing for Soldier. Maybe their support's not that great. But there were times that Suna's Soldier actually looked pretty good. It was just that team as a whole just doesn't have any chemistry. We just saw, and I know we're about to get to it in our next discussion, but we saw Stitch and Janu come in the day they were signed, or the day it was official and league approved.
Yeah,
come in and took a map off one of the hottest teams in the league. Yet we see these guys, we saw them start to get put together when all the rumors were circulating. So they've had plenty of time now to kind of get to know each other, and there's just no chemistry. So for me, I feel like it's just player to player is the issue, not necessarily the heroes, because we also saw, again, we talked about the hunters and their soldier, and it worked.
Yeah.
So I think it's that chemistry and how they're going to set up their team fights to utilize the heroes.
Yeah, and I'm glad you did went ahead and brought up, Stitch and John. So obviously they were acquired by the Justice, which I think you had actually called that. You said that Stitch you could definitely see him going and fitting in rather well, and he did. He did.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
I was
yeah.
I was super excited about that pickup. So
Yeah.
I don't mean to. Sorry to cut you off there, but
No,
I was
you're good.
very excited because if you look, there are players in the league that you see some similarities, and you go, "Oh man, that'd be a matchup to watch." Like last year, our matchup that we loved to see, a couple of them, we loved to see Sinatra and Haxel going head to head on the
Hmm.
Doomfist once DPS came back. We loved seeing Twilight and Jonak on the Zens go at each other. We had these micro matchups within the matchups that we loved to watch. And one that didn't get a lot of attention was last year when the Washington Justice beat the Titans. The Titans were playing Stitch, and Stitch was playing whatever hero Corey was playing. It's just Corey was playing better. But they were playing the same way. And so with that match in mind, once all this went down, I'm like, that would be a good switch, a good pickup. It would fill the role now, and then it would hopefully be a little bit better chemistry, considering be an all Korean roster at that point, and the language barrier would be broken. It would be a little bit smoother. So I was super excited about that pickup. I was just stunned about the Janu because we had every indication that Dallas was signing him. The deal was done, just waiting for league approval, and we never got any update that there wasn't a league approval.
Yeah,
And here he is.
which I'm pretty happy of where they've landed, and I thought it was definitely it's a good morale booster for them to pick up a map against the Mayhem. Before, we had both said that this was going to be a 3-0, and I think without them it was. They played a little bit closer. You're able to put a little bit more pressure on the tanks and support with Stitch. But Yaki and BQB were bullying Tuba and Stitch the whole time.
They were.
They're just so much better, and I think that Stitch, if he was obviously we've seen him be on a better team and play very well, but Yaki right now is just on some other level with some of the best DPS, and he can kind of play whatever you need him to. I mean, we've seen him play the Junkrat, the Echo, the Tracer, whatever. So he's got all these heroes in his back pocket, and BQB is the perfect sidekick to that as well. He peels for his healers when they're running dive comps, and I think that's one of the things that the Justice or the Mayhem do the best is protecting their back line. They do that very well, even with Yaki generally flanking, whether from above on Echo or from the side, or even we saw him flank his Junkrat and get that absolutely crazy kill. So or kills team kill basically.
Yeah, multi.
Yeah, so the double shield wasn't working at first with the Mayhem. The Justice had figured out kind of how to get around that, but they stuck with it. And by the third map, that was it. They had already figured it out exactly what their positioning, what they wanted to do, and it just was over at that point. Once their tanks figured it out, it was over.
Yeah, and that was kind of how, and I'll get to those in a second, but I really wanted to talk as quickly as we can since we have more to get to.
Yeah.
The Hanamura map that we saw, not only was it the Justice, they won the map they won, it broke the map win streak that the Mayhem had going on.
Yes.
They were about, I think they were at 10 maps in a row at that point. And
more.
It was either 9 or I think it was 9 or 10.
12?
They were looking at 11. Maybe it may have been 12
because they had
we'll have to,
so many 3-0s in a row.
Mm-hmm. But they took the map and they did it by correcting something that they didn't do in the first map, on the first map, which was just better hero selection for each of the characters. We know what Jonnu can do on Diva.
Mm-hmm.
So putting him on Diva as opposed to, I believe they had him on Zarya the first map, which didn't really make any sense. Putting him on the Diva to complement the I'm sorry, my caffeine's wearing off. I might need to take another hit. The Winston from Roar, which is easily his you could debate if it's Reinhardt or his Winston, but one of his two best tanks. And then you put Johnny on his best, and then you finally you basically you give them characters that can go and create the lanes that you need someone for Stitch to be able to utilize Ashe better, have those lines of sight to be able to get those picks, put out the damage, and force the Mayhem back. And I don't think the Mayhem were ready for that. They made the adjustments though, because Junkertown, they had their way, and then Kings Row, watching it, the only takeaway I could have for the last map on Kings Row was just that Yaki is a monster.
Yeah.
He's
if
really
he plays like this,
if he plays like this against the better teams in the league, the Mayhem could be this year's Shanghai Dragons with the resurgence that they would have.
Yeah.
So,
and I did look, they had won 12 maps in a row. They had 3-0'd 4 times in a row. And so I assumed they would continue that streak before they got Stitch. I probably would have said 3-1 had I known that they were going to pick these people up, or had we guessed beforehand. I would like to think that I would have given Justice a map.
I feel like we both would have.
Yeah.
Because that's the value that they bring. So.
Yeah. And one other thing, because I know we still have quite a bit to get to, and we're taking our sweet old time, but the Mayhem are very good at drawing out enemy ults when they want you to. When they think, okay, we need to get this Zenda ult because our next team fight, we're going to win with, our win condition is this ult, and we don't want that Zen to counter it. So they're very good at prolonging these fights and getting that ult on the other team to not necessarily be wasted, but to maybe come out earlier than they want to really finish off that fight. So they're very, very good. One of the better teams in the league at drawing out the counter ults on the other team.
Mm-hmm. They do a very good job with the alt matchup.
Yeah. So one of the very, very surprising matches that we talked, and even though they won, I still don't want to talk about it at all, because who cares right now about Boston? But the Gladiators were looking very good a couple weeks ago. They were in my top 5, and they just haven't played well enough to continue, so that they obviously won't be in my top 5 now that they have lost to the worst team in the league. But Jerry played very well. Jerry was popping off on that Ashe and McCree. The addition of Punk, though, really helped with their positioning. I mean, tremendously helped with their positioning, and I think that is what allowed him to make some of those shots. It's a lot easier when you have time to line up and you're not making 0.2 second shots every single time because you have 3 people diving on you. So I think that really, really did well. The Hanamura map, they should have won the last fight on Hanamura to put it over. And it just would have been a faster match. They still end up winning, but that map 3, they really should have won that. I think that was old Uprising coming through for whatever this new Uprising that they were playing. That was just really, really poor play from them. But they were getting picks early, and I think that really, really helped them.
Yeah, and we've heard the casters be high on Jerry for weeks now. We heard at one point Sideshow and Brim were doing one of the matches, and they're like, "Where's Jerry? He's not in there. Put him in." And they were like clamoring as though the coaches could hear them.
What was that?
I like halfway through doing that, I'm like, should I imitate their accent? Nah. And then the other voice was like, no, go ahead and do it. Yeah. So that was a lack of commitment to the accent. That's what that was. Plus, I'm honestly still trying to wrap my head around what happened in that match. Again, Jerry played well. I mean, he played well enough that he's into the top 10 in final blows.
Yeah,
so
he played very well,
finishing every engagement that he needed to. My concern was OG.
Yes.
Usually
Me
we see
too.
him playing much more solid tank, good balance of offense and defense, but it was like he would make the wrong decision at the exact wrong time. It wasn't like that, oh, you made the wrong decision at the right time where it could be compensated for, or the right decision at the wrong time. It was truly like, dude, you know not to do that. He would overextend in engagements and get picked, leaving them without any type of protection. He would sit back with too much of a defensive mindset or protection, but not setting up any flanks for anybody else to be able to set up any type of elimination or pick to keep the snowball rolling. And basically, Space was trying to have to pick up his workload. Like, as his name says, and we have joked about in the past, Space creates space, but he does it based off of what OG dictates
Hmm.
first. That's usually what your main tank and off tank are going to do. Main tank, again, establishes the point of attack, creates the initial lanes. The off tank will go through, usually with the DPS, dictate the remainder of the encounter, who's getting picked first, or where they're going to shape it to. Are they going to move them to the left? Are they trying to back them up? Are they trying to move them into where they're so clustered together that you can hit them with an alt like a Graviton Surge or something like that to be able to get mass eliminations, team kills? But there was just the lack of communication, it seemed like, was just baffling. Now we should give credit. We've already given it to Jerry, to Fusions for finally playing the way that we are used to seeing him
Yes.
playing,
Yes, I'm
and
glad you said that.
it was very reassuring. And I figured you'd want to talk about that because you had kind of
I've
given him
been
a little bit of grief last week. I'm like,
yes.
I know Austin's going to want to talk about Fusions, so
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
ahead, just take the floor.
I
I know
want to
you're
talk
excited.
about Fusions and Punk because Fusions obviously has the potential to be one of the better tanks, and I don't think
Has
he's.
been.
Yeah, and I think Punk really helped because Punk's spacing is so good. I have on here OG and Space were getting beaten by Fusions and Punk. OG and Space are the core of that team, as tanks tend to be. But we see, some teams like the Valiant, their core is their DPS, not necessarily their tanks. I think the same thing with the Mayhem. So their tanks, OG and Space, were just getting moved around, and it's like I can't remember his name. He in his NFL Hall of Fame acceptance speech, he said he was very good at taking a man at point A and moving him to point B, and that's why he was good in the NFL. And that's what OG and Space are very good at doing. They are two of the I think they have the highest level of chemistry that you can between a main tank, and an off tank. Their rotations and spacing are always perfect. At least it was. And they got bullied and moved around by Fusions and Punk, and Fusions was playing exceptionally well. I would love to see him continue this. I think, and I've said it 4 or 5 times now, I think the addition of Punk is really, really going to help them out. I don't think that they are by any means going to jump up into that elite category, but I think they could really start to beat some teams and use this as momentum to I mean, this is a Gladiators team that has been historically good this season, but they're falling off a little bit too. Space wasn't playing Diva though, and I think that was an issue. He has the best Diva stats in the league. Let me pull these up because I took a picture of this. So here's his stats on Diva. Hero damage per 10 minutes, 7,800. He is first in the league. Final blows per 10 minutes, 7.4. He is first in the league. Knockback kills per 10 minutes, 8.5. He is second in the league. Ultimates negated per 10 minutes, about a half an ult, tied for second in the league. Self-destruct kills per 10 minutes, 1.5, second in the league, which that's crazy to me because usually Diva's ult in Overwatch League is not to get big kills. It is for spacing and to move people where you don't want them, or where you want them. Final blow death ratio is 1.8. He is tied for second in the league. Those are you have this godlike person on Diva. It never played Diva, so I'm not sure what was happening there, or if they just thought, you know what, we're going to experiment around a little bit since, Boston's not necessarily one of the better teams. This is probably an easy out for us. And none of these teams can be taken that way. Even the worst team here with Boston can't be taken that way. They will beat you. It's been a crazy time for this, and so I will hop off my soapbox about Fusions. But Fusions played very well. I'm gonna tweet out to him, Fusions. I hope you see this. Tell your friends I love you, and play better.
Continue to play better.
Continue to play better, please. So I was very happy with how the Uprising played. They did not play like they have. The early picks with Jerry and Fusions really taken over. Just really bullied the Gladiators around. So we start to get into the second half of the weekend, and we start with the Shock versus Reign. A lot of these second half matches weren't very close, so we'll talk some about these. We probably won't have too many. I mean, I have some notes, but probably won't have too many notes just for the sake of time. But the Shock versus Reign, I mean, the Shock are just looking pretty unbeatable right now.
I really wouldn't say unbeatable, simply because we saw on Junkertown the Reign kind of closing the gap a little bit, making it more of a challenge. They forced second round attacks, which to me, if you can force that, that means that there's a little bit of a gap being closed between something is working. And honestly, the one thing that was working for the Reign the entire time was Baby Bay. Like, you talk about Dante being, an MVP candidate on any other team. I think that about Baby Bay. We've seen him outplay Carpe on Ash. We've now seen him outplay. Is it Ons? How do they pronounce that guy? ANS.
ANS. That's why
I'm just going to call him ANS because I don't want to mispronounce.
Tag us if we're saying it wrong.
Yes, we saw him outplay ANS, who, last week played a really good Ash, and now this week Baby Bay comes in and says, "Oh, that's cute. Let me show you how it's done." But we've seen him now try to carry this team to wins. Yeah. And he's doing his job. He's not getting picked that early. Honestly, not early at all. He's usually getting picked later in fights. We even saw a couple times on Volskaya, he was the last man around to try and cap the point or flip the point because of his positioning. And that's after he's already gotten 3 picks. While I say that, that he's basically trying to carry this team on his back, on the flip side, this was one of those matches that kind of shows that the Shock are probably the second deepest team. And I say that simply because we saw him play this weekend, but we've seen Super be benched in favor of Smurf, who plays honestly much better to me. And now also we should talk about how Gator outplays Super on Reinhardt. But anyway, but we've seen Choyobin in the off-tank role just absolutely dictating and commanding every team fight and every one-on-one matchup he could possibly get himself into. There was, on Volskaya, a play where the Reign had a 6-3 advantage, and it was on their attack. This should be their opportunity to cap the first point, move on to the second. Choi comes in and basically leads a team kill. He gets a triple kill, and then we see not even their DPS, wasn't even Rascal and ANS. We saw Moth and Violet come in and help mop up the remainder of that fight, started by Choyobin, and it ends up forcing a C9 from the Reign because the Reign are so concerned about getting back in there and reasserting dominance after being handled that way that nobody touches the point. The closest one that came, I believe, was Baby Bay trying to get to the point, but he got booped backwards. And it's, while the Shock are looking very good, especially when they're running, whether it's Striker and Rascal or it's ANS and Rascal, Smurf, Choi, and of course Violet and Moth. Those two setups, they do look like a team that is going to be there in the end, and probably even this weekend with the start of the May Melee. But with some of the flashes that we saw from the Reign, they're not that dominant and that far ahead of others, because if the Reign, who are basically being carried on the back of one player at this point, can force later maps to be that close after being so dominated the first time around, then there's some things to shore up. But I do think the Shock are well on their way to being what they were last year.
Yeah, and I obviously agree. With this match, I think the biggest thing, especially early on with the Reign, they were running the Rein Zarya against the double shield against or with the Shock. Clearly, that was leaning towards the double shield. They were running a sim, on Reign, but that shield's going down really fast, and Sim, she doesn't have any escape abilities to get out of there. So when that shield's down, she's an easy pick. And for a team like the Shock that doesn't miss shots like that, that's a very risky comp to play. And obviously it didn't pay off. And I'm glad we talked about Rascal earlier. Rascal, to me, has cemented himself as the best Echo. I had said a couple weeks ago that I thought it was Deeding when he had played a better team, and he is still playing very well. But Rascal's ability to just pick up heroes and play however he wants with anyone, I don't know what he does differently than everyone else. He's just playing a better Echo than anyone else right now. And it does have some to do with the positioning of the other team, but Echo is generally by herself. She might have a Mercy or something like that I think we're going to see not in the Overwatch League so much, but in, our comp play. You might see an Echo Mercy, but we haven't. We've seen them be pretty independent, and he's still able to get these picks and get in the back line and just do whatever the hell he wants to. They can't pick him. They just can't. He's never the first one dead, even though he's out in the open. His movement, his spacing, his shots are so good. To me, Libero obviously has been playing very well, but Rascal's done it every single week she's been released, except for the week that they took her out of rotation for whatever reason. Oh, right. Here's a new hero. Oh, you played that new hero too much. You can't play her anymore.
Well, no, that's the thing. They didn't even play her. Like, it was the first week she was available. They're like, well, actually, she's not available.
Right. Yeah.
What? That's why I actually messaged you and Greg that day. Like, well, she didn't even get any playtime.
Didn't even get any playtime.
But I should say, this was the first match where we saw Rascal getting picked early.
Sure.
And it was because of Baby Bay, but we would see him get those picks. And this is where one thing that doesn't get talked about enough with any team should be. The Shock did a very good job of, after that, shifting their focus to whoever picked that person. Mm-hmm. Because it meant that because of how Rascal plays so with the team, and like rather than going up and out and extending with the Echo, he just floats up and uses her range. And then once people come in, then he closes that gap, gets the engagement going, and gets the pick. We would see Baby Bay get those picks, and they immediately knew, all right, he's out of position. We got to force him back. And once they forced him back, the Reign had no answer. But again, that was something that they adjusted later on. But that was one thing that stuck out.
And I would be interested to see later on, the Shock are very good at winning team fights early. Very, very fast team fights. I'm interested to see when they play these better teams. And this is a pretty decent Reign team. They're not elite. I had them in my top 5 at 5 a couple weeks ago. I think that they have fallen quite a bit since then. But we tend to see the Shock lose fights when they start trading, but that doesn't happen very often. Generally, if they get a pick first, that team fight is over. The Shock will swarm. They say, okay, who did we pick? If we picked a tank, dive the other tank. Dive the other tank. If we picked a support, we're diving the other. If we picked a DPS, they're diving the supports. So they're very good at, when they start winning a team fight, they win that fight. They don't lose team fights that they should win, and that's huge. You shouldn't take any of these team fights for granted, and I don't think that they do. Even when they get a couple picks, they make sure that they win that fight without using ults, and I think a big part of that is their DPS playing very well. Mm-hmm. This was a match that I didn't think would be quite as close. The Charge right now are one of my favorite teams to watch. I think they're playing lights out. They dropped the ball a little bit here. The Hunters, obviously, coming off of their win against Seoul, I think we're on some kind of high, and they stayed exactly how they were. Now, I don't think that they were utilizing the EMP from Jinmu. I saw several times where he was getting 3 and 4 people EMP'd. Nothing was coming out of it. Now, he wasn't really up against that good of a Sombra on the other side. I mean, Happy was playing Sombra on Gibraltar. I know he's known as a hit scan, but that's not a character you generally see him on. He doesn't normally play Sombra. I know they probably don't want to put him on Echo, so they didn't. And I would rather see him on Echo than and just allow him to play that projectile character instead of putting him on Sombra. I think that really gave the Hunters a foothold, and that's where they won these 2 maps.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too had to do with 2 things. One, the Hunters, again, my big issue was they were so sporadic with what they were putting together. They had no consistency with the comp. Like, they didn't even have a comp before this past weekend where it was, here's 4 out of 6, and we're just changing these 2. Like, we're trading out the Ana for a Zen. We're trading out the Sombra for a Tracer. We were seeing a complete 6 pick a random every time.
Yeah.
This was the first time we've seen, not only the first day were they running a consistent comp, we saw back-to-back days of them running a consistent comp. They ran that soldier dive again. That variant seems to be working very well for them, that high mobility with that DPS character, rather than, a Widow who can isolate, or a McCree who, is just as formidable of a DPS output. I think them having that consistency, we talk about momentum all the time. I think that was huge for them. And then with that momentum in mind, we saw the Charge break theirs up. They put Nero on the bench in favor of Eileen, which Eileen's a good player, but he's not Nero. And I feel like, honestly, if you have Nero in there and you're wanting to run that Echo, then you have something, and then you can 3-0. Because Nero, we've seen him be one of the best FARs in the league. And when they started Echo, when Echo came into the league just a few weeks ago, he was one of the better ones on that hero. Yeah. And it was just working so well for the Charge. And I mean, they even beat the NYXL with that setup. And they had Happy on McCree. Happy's better with the hit scan, as you had mentioned. So I feel like it was just one team continued to keep that momentum going. The Charge broke theirs up enough to give up 2 maps. They ended up getting the win in the end, and they did have some moments though where it looked it looked rough, to say the least. And I think that might dictate who they have in the roster starting lineup, going forward. And hopefully they need to go back to Nero Happy. That seems to have a much better synergy than Eileen and Happy, and even Eileen and Nero, which we haven't seen that much for that reason.
Yeah, and I think so too. It was really weird to see Happy on the Sombra and not just playing, a McCree or even Ashe, something like that. I think the biggest thing that I took away from the Charge was actually Rio. I'm not sure which way
Rio.
Okay.
Rio.
Yeah. So he was having a really hard time finding any positioning against Jinmu. Jinmu is playing that Sombra, but when he was on Winston or Ball, as soon as he was diving in, sometimes in midair, he was getting hacked. You can't, I mean, you're done for. With either of those 2 characters, that is your hardest counter, other than Reaper, if you're Winston. But you can't get away. You can't drop your shield. as Winston as Ball, you are obviously you're not rolling anymore. You have to pop up and be Hammond. You can't use your biggest ability, which is your overshield. I mean, it increases when he drops in and a team of 6, and all of a sudden Ball has 1,000 health. He's an ulting Winston, so all of a sudden you can't do that. You can't get away very fast. You have no shield to back you up, and you're going down. So then they stuck with that almost the whole time. Now, Krong on the exact opposite end of that spectrum, Krong has been one of my favorite tanks to watch so far this year. He's playing so well, and I don't think he gets talked about quite as much as some of these other tanks, main tanks, especially with the likes of Mono and them. So I put him up there with that right now. With the way he's playing, he is on that same level. I think Mono is still better. I think he's on a better team though. I mean, at least I would have said that maybe, but Charger, they're my favorite to win right now. I said that last week, and even with this match going a little awry, they still came back and finished strong. And that's what good teams do. They don't lose these matches that they shouldn't lose. And I wanted to talk about the Hunters just one more thing before we move on. Leave on McCree. Only had 2 eliminations on Anubis. 2 eliminations. That is awful. But it's also a testament to the positioning that the Charge take and Krong. And even though, Rio was not playing his best match, a hit scan like McCree generally is getting those picks in the back line. You're picking people that are, high up now with the Echo and the Pharah and the Mercy. And he just couldn't get anything done. I mean, 2 eliminations? I don't think I've ever been held to 2 eliminations, even playing Mercy. 2 eliminations in this is such a low, and I think it feels I don't want to say he should feel bad about it, but he should internalize that match, understand that his positioning was not good. He did not put himself in a position to make any picks. It just 2 kills. They weren't even solo kills. It was bad. So now we get into the slew of 3-0s, and I almost want to group all these together because
we could group 2 of them together.
Yeah. So,
but one it was.
So, well, and there was only a couple things I wanted to say in the sake of time. I know. Sorry for the listeners. I know we're running over, but there's just a crap ton to talk about this week. Spark London and Philly Vancouver. They were very, very one-sided fights, especially Philly Vancouver. I don't even really want to mention them again. That was Grandmasters playing against bronze level players. That's what it looked like.
But
Vancouver played a little better.
But I was going to say, bronze don't take maps off Grandmasters. Or I should say, don't take rounds off.
Right. They didn't take
rounds.
A map.
They didn't take a map. They took rounds because the Fusion the Fusion should have absolutely demolished the Titans. I had said that they should be able to set a match time record, and they didn't. As soon as the Titans handedly forced the Fusion off the first point on Oasis to end up getting 99, they got 99%.
99.
And flipped it, and then got their own 99. And I believe that's the point. That's the one point that they almost.
It's the only one.
They had it in overtime.
Yeah, it's the only one.
You don't let that happen, and really no concerns though, because the Fusion did sure that up, and we saw them again. And with Poco this time around, we saw them finally play 6v6 engagement. They weren't going for early picks, which honestly, if you were going to do that against any team, the Titans would be that team. But they didn't do that. They respected them enough to go 6v6. And there was no hovering around one ultimate ability. They just played. This looks like the Philly Fusion team that we saw most of first season, which is good. That's what they need to be moving forward if they hope to be able to vie for another, have another chance to vie for a championship like they
Yeah,
did in season.
they could have spawn camped this team. They
Yeah,
really could have. I
should
mean,
have really.
and right, I think that they were messing around. It seemed like they were having fun messing around with this team. I think they tried a couple positioning things that they don't normally do because this is the team to try it against because you know that you can recover so easily. But with the Spark London, so Spark is like I said on my radar to watch here. Spark is, in this match in particular, they were able to prolong their fights, especially on these control maps when the percentage is all that matters. It doesn't matter how many team fights you win, how many team fights you lose. What matters is how long you held that point for. They fought one team fight from 67% from where the first shot was fired to a 99% and a take. That is a long, long team fight, which, especially in a game where sometimes people, they'll get it, they'll get 9% and then it'll get flipped on them. That was a very, very good thing that I wanted to see from them because the earlier matches, the Spark are wanting to engage very quickly, even when they're not running dive. They want to get close and engage. And in this one, they were able to kind of hang back and be patient. And I'm glad that we were able to see that side of them because that fight going on for that long, just crazy. Adora was winning the Sombra battle really early on in that first map. And I think that just set the tone for the rest of it. London's having a rough stretch here. I don't think that they played well. I think it's both things. The Spark obviously just playing better, but I don't think that London stepped up and played the same level of intensity that the Spark did. It just seemed very, very one-sided. London's tank play has just not been good. Nothing they can do. Their tank play hasn't been good.
Nope.
And so I know I'm going to let you talk mostly about this one with the Paris-Dallas because we both thought this would be a lot closer than it ended up being.
Yep. My first.
We both took Dallas.
We did both take Dallas. I really don't have much because I've also been as high as I've been on the fuel. I've been as high on Paris. I had them in my top 5. The only reason they weren't in my top 5 last week was just because we saw Soul and Charge play so well, and I'm like, well, they honestly looked better. Even though Paris looks good, they looked better. And now, Paris pulled it out. But I just want to start because I don't really have that much, to be honest. It's mostly all Paris. Can we not put Junkertown in the map rotation when Paris is playing? It is not fair to their opponents. It is absolutely not fair to their opponents. It's just a speed run.
It's a guaranteed win.
Every time they play, they're gonna have 4 minutes in their time bank by the time they're done. And these other teams are like, wait a minute, how they figure this out? What do you?
We hate Paris. How do we figure this out?
I have no idea how they figured out Junkertown so efficiently that they can. Teams should know going in that this is one of their best maps, and if you put it right there at the second or the third map, you're giving them a huge opportunity to win their matches just because they've mastered it.
Yeah, it's hard to come back from that.
We haven't seen many teams master a map the way the Paris has mastered Junkertown. And for me, that's the one map to look at if you want to look at. You don't even have to watch the first 2 maps. Just watch Junkertown. The way they play with just such efficiency is awesome. It's absolutely beautiful. The biggest addition for me, we don't really talk about it that much with Paris. We really don't talk about their roster movement that much, is Hanbin. Hanbin has been a wonderful acquisition to the off-tank role. He doesn't get a ton of eliminations, but he gets them at the right time, and he gets them when he should, and he's usually doing it alongside their DPS, so he's playing the off-tank role complement the perfect way. He is still in, let's see here. Trying to make sure they don't have they need to start numbering the charts on the stats,
Yeah.
but he is in, yep, the top 20 for hero damage. I mean, and when you're talking about a list that can, as far as tanks go, when you're talking about a list that consists of, let's see, oh man, there's so many. Meko, Muma, Krong, Roar, even McGravy, who's a rookie.
Yeah.
Like all, and even his counter, even his teammate Nico, who's a DPS player, he's right behind him. So that shows how well he is playing spacing wise. And it's just, I didn't think that he would be the big acquisition. For me, it was who was going to be their flex support when they got FD God. I didn't know who was going to be able to work with Cruz that well, because we saw in the early parts of last season, their flex support character was honestly their issue with the Zen play, because you had Cruz on the Lucio. And the Zen just wasn't matching up with the others in the league, like the Twilights, the Jonax, the Ryu Jahangs, even the Violets of the world. Those were the kind of acquisitions we were really watching. But then we see Cruz isn't in there, and the whole support changed, but they got it shored up. So then it was, okay, who's going to be right there on the off tank role with, and I'm blanking on his name all of a sudden. I had this prepped in my mind. This is the worst. Their main tank, who I honestly is one of my favorite players, which I shouldn't be forgetting what his Ben Best. Thank you.
Yeah.
My goodness.
I knew
But
you'd get there eventually.
this was one of those matches, like it was a clinic on how an off tank should play, not only with his main tank, but with the DPS. And I just can't say enough good things about Hanbin. For me, he was the big takeaway. Oh, and actually, a little side note that I forgot to mention, but I do have written here, is he's actually jumped into the top 20 on eliminations as well. So he's really starting to establish himself as one of the best off tanks in the league. And I think that he just outplayed Note for Dallas. And I think that that's the one weak point that we've finally seen with Dallas, which is why that Johnny pickup was, we saw them not being able to get him to be a huge factor this weekend, which honestly I think is going to be a hindrance on the Dallas Fuel going forward. So for me, this win was all about the Eternal, but it did highlight the biggest weak point in the Dallas Fuel.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was beautifully said. This was my favorite match to watch. Was the Valiant versus the Defiant. The Valiant ended up taking it, and I'm pretty high on the Valiant right now. The Defiant, I obviously have very good damage dealers. We got to see 3, really 4 with agilities also being in there, but 3 of the best damage dealers right now in the league, in KSP, who I think is still going to be Rookie of the Year, Shax, and Logix. And you can throw agilities in there as well. He's very good. He's not hasn't been playing as one of the elite damage dealers right now, but he has the potential to. So these team fights were so fast, and KSP was getting shut down early on. He was getting picked early, and whoever won that first pick, and it was not supports, it was not tanks that were getting picked, it was DPS. That is a little unusual. We usually see the team that picks the other team's support. That's normally the team that wins. But in this case, those DPS players were going back and forth, but especially on Busan, KSP was not getting the at one point, KSP had 200 damage, and Logix had 2,200 damage. So KSP getting shut down was very surprising to me. He's been one of my favorites, and Shax wasn't necessarily there to pick up all the slack. He was doing some, but Logix and Agilities were just working very well together for that first map. But I think it really highlights the damage ability of these two teams, because those team fights were so fast. I mean, they were long range and they were fast. Even the tanks hitting long range sometimes and moving up a little bit. It's the first time that we've seen them struggle early. Generally, the Valiant are a first half kind of team. They go in and they kick ass immediately. But KSP not able to get the space that he needs to take the risky shots that he normally makes. It was fun to watch Agilities play against his own team. I thought he played very well. This was a toss-up, and I know we had talked in the last episode about this match and us not really being able to say who we thought was going to win. We both ended up picking the Valiant, but I picked the Valiant because of KSP, and I think I was wrong in that.
Well, and it was kind of the flip for me is I picked the Valiant because I didn't know whether or not Surefour was playing.
Right.
Because the biggest question mark for me personally has been the chemistry of Agilities and Logics. This was the first weekend we saw them kind of click. And whether it was because they knew the role they were going to play in the team strategy or whatever it may be, or maybe they just had enough time to finally be like, I know how you play, you know how I play, let's just go do our thing. But the fact that on Busan, that's the map that sticks out the most for me, and it was a big takeaway. We saw Logics not only dictating where the DPS were going to attack from, but predicting where they were going to attack from. So he would force KSP to start an engagement here and make him move all the way. There was the third team fight, I believe it was. KSP started off on the bridge and ended up being forced all the way to his right, basically to the halfway point between the spawn and that attack point in the hangar bay. As KSP is rounding the corner to try and flank at this point, because when you're forced off that way, you would think, okay, if I go into the flank, I can get the guy who creeps out past the shield, and then that's one pick. They readjust their focus, and then we can swarm. We can just crash in there. The moment he rounds that corner, Logix is already aiming down the sights, and one shot, headshot, he's out of the match. And then you see the Valiant have to scramble to reset where they're attacking, all the while giving up more percentage points to the Defiant. So I feel like those kind of things are what kept the Defiant in this, and hopefully going forward would make them be one of the better teams that we expect them to be. Because if you can have Logics and Agilities playing this complementary style where one is basically guarding the flanks or the outside attack points and dictating that fight, especially what the DPS do, and just let Agilities dish out damage with his team, with everybody else grouped up, and then crashing once that first pick comes through from Logics, then you should probably be able to win more team fights, which should result in more map wins, which would result in more wins. Hopefully this can be a genuine snowball effect. But yeah, this was one of the few weekends, probably the first that we've seen KSP be outplayed. And it was by somebody who doesn't get a lot of credit for the DPS player that he is in Logics.
Yeah, that was my biggest thing is he looked human again. KSP obviously probably the best hit scan player that we've seen very early on. He's just been so dominant. And he's not generally reliant on his tanks. Now, Busan's a little bit different with the sight lines, how they are. He was a little bit more reliant, and I think that the Defiance tanks were playing very well to push around the Valiant's tanks. So he wasn't able to get as much space as Logix was and get those long sight lines, especially on that first map. But he looked human again. Him and Shax both. Logix and Agilities really came through for the Defiant. I found myself almost wanting the Defiant to win, even though I have, been picking the Valiant to win these matches, just because they definitely played a little bit better than I thought they were going to, even without Surefour. And I thought, and I think you nailed it with Agilities and Logix. Their communication and the way that they were running really, really synced up this week, and this is the first week that we've seen that. And they shut down a team that is not, that has two of the best DPS in the league. So hats off to the Defiant. It really sucks that they didn't end up pulling out the win. The Valiant still played very well. They were able to recover. I'm glad we got to see them in a match like this where it was a dogfight. It was so back and forth with their DPS. And even though their DPS were losing fights, their supports and their tanks were stepping up and winning fights for them. They weren't only reliant upon getting picks first. So I'm glad that we got to see that. I think this match has made the Valiant a stronger team moving forward, and I'm pretty excited to see how they play.
Absolutely.
So There were a couple storylines with the Justice that we've already talked about. Obviously, they picked up Stitch and John, and they played right away. But there's been some coaching changes as well.
They let go of Bonnie sometime earlier this afternoon. Most likely it was early morning, but the news broke this afternoon.
Yeah.
And on top of that, they let their general manager go.
What direction do you think that they're trying to move in here?
I really can't say. My assumption with the general manager move is they don't like the fact that they've lost all this depth. There was no, and he had no immediate, I'm guessing no immediate plans to fill the gap, to fill the holes that were left by Corey and Stratus, and try to shore up the depth at their DPS. They just went out, got Stitch, and it's like putting what is it, the Band-Aid over a hole in the Hoover Dam or something.
Yeah.
Which and that's not to say that Stitch isn't a good fix there, because he is, but when you have somebody like Tuba who's really not all that good, if we're being quite honest, he's not very good. He did compliment.
It's just okay.
He complimented Stitch well enough to get them again a map win, but going forward, you need somebody else. And now credit to them understanding that Ellie vote was not the way to go off tank, and they needed to get somebody else to complement Roar better, and that's certainly what Janu's going to do.
Yeah.
My assumption is they're going to try and get somebody who maybe has a more aggressive philosophy in roster building, and that's what I would hope. And we need to see, honestly, more of from a lot of the teams in the league, especially down towards the bottom, like your Houstons, your Vancouvers, your Washingtons. Those guys need to be making more moves because they're just a few pieces away, and usually that aggression gets you those few pieces and catapults you. If you don't believe me, go look at the Shanghai Dragons last year.
And it makes people want to play with. It makes people want to play for you when they see that you're trying. These better players will go to a team that is just middle of the pack or a little bit lower, because they believe that the team will make strides and bring people in around them.
Yep. And then, of course, they're going to play for you if you get the right head coach.
Yep.
Which I really don't know what their move would be.
Hire Jake.
Oh, gosh.
Bring him out as a caster.
Yeah, I don't see that happening anytime soon. Honestly, if you're going to listen, if you're going to try and get Jake, grab Custa to bring with him. Those two as a coaching duo, I'd pay just to watch them be sitting in the control room coaching. Yeah. Because those two would be entertaining, and I guarantee they would throw around.
Don't tell Blizzard that, because they'll charge us.
A lot. Well, that might be a new idea for them to put together.
Right.
But they've got an all-Korean roster now, so my guess would be they would try and go and get a Korean head coach. Maybe they'll go pick up one of the former NYXL coaches. I mean, because they'd have somebody who has history with ARC, because ARC was a part of that first season NYXL team. If they went and got one of those coaches that left after that season, there'd be some chemistry there. And would also, since they have this all-Korean lineup, again, that language barrier, we've seen some teams like the Gladiators especially who have a support player in Big Goose learning Korean just to, make it a two-way street on that communication. Yeah. But a lot of other teams aren't doing that. They're having success because they don't have that language barrier. Like they have some players who have a two-way lingo, but this isn't one of those teams. I don't think. We have a couple players who, if they can speak English, is slightly broken. So there can be a miscommunication there. And if you have an English head coach, you're going to have some issues with running compositions and strategies. So that would be the only way I could think that would go, is to get a Korean speaking coach, and specifically maybe one like one of the former NYXLs, just because there would be a chemistry instantaneous, at least between one of the players and that coach, and a trust built.
And this is about the only type of sport, especially these games, where they're so heavily popular in Asian culture, that there's such a huge language barrier. I think the only other one I could think of would maybe be soccer, since it's fairly global, people speaking different language on the same team. Baseball, a little bit. You get these Cuban players or these Mexican players that come over, sometimes Japanese players, but they're still kind of, I don't want to say few and far between, but because there's a lot of them, but they generally speak some English enough to get you through. You don't need comms in baseball or, the NFL, there's lingo to go through. With something like this, it's so dominant on communication, and you can't use signs like baseball. I might not know what fastball is in Korean, but I know what this means.
Sure.
So your Korean pitcher knows what that means. There's no signs like that in esports necessarily that cut and dry. So I could definitely see them doing that and going out and maybe getting a Korean head coach and hopefully maybe one that speaks English and one that doesn't, and they can go back. And I do like that they're trying to pick up some other language to be able to communicate at least a little bit, because that's such important in this game. Mm-hmm. So next week is not a normal week. We have the May Melee, which I'm a little upset that they didn't put May like MEI. I feel like they really messed up, and they really could have put the Melee or like
Or
May MEILEE. I mean, either way, there's so many ways you can do it.
Right. They could have just done May-Lee.
Yeah.
I mean,
but
anyway,
starting off on Saturday, there's 3 matches, which will be great for us because there won't be 1,000 matches to report on the following week, but there'll be a couple. So Saturday, we start out with the Spark and the Dynasty fighting for a chance to play the Charge in the semifinals. Spark at the 4 seed, Dynasty at the 7 seed. Dynasty's so volatile. Who do you think here?
Well, before we get to that one, don't skip over the Friday match that we have as a qualifier between the Defiant and the Titans.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I just assumed the Defiant would win.
I mean, that's the thing. We can't take any of these as for certains. How many times have we said that this is a for certain? And then we said that Boston was going to get 3-0'd. It doesn't get more guaranteed than that. And they 3-2'd the Gladiators. So,
yeah.
And honestly, that's an important one to talk about because that's going to dictate the rest of the bracket, really, especially since they're giving teams, higher ranked teams, higher seeded, the choice of who to play.
Well, you're talking about the other. I'm talking about the Asian.
Oh, I was going day by day, because you just started with Saturday.
Yeah, sorry.
But if we're just going with the Asian bracket, I mean, with the Dragons, I'm going to take the Dragons over the Spitfire. I would take NYXL over the Hunters, which that's what we should all hope for, because that would be a wonderful semifinal, because their first matchup was a very good match. And then who do you take between the Spark and the Dynasty? I don't know. My heart says to take the Dynasty, but my head says take the Spark.
I think the Spark are going to win. I think it's really on the Dynasty. This is either going to be very one-sided with the Spark winning, or it's going to be very close with Dynasty winning. I think if it's close, the Dynasty end up pulling it out. I think the Spark is the better team now. They've played well enough that they can obviously handle some of these better teams, which the Soul has been at times. Not a whole lot this year, but at times, flashes of greatness. I think the Spark are going to win. I am most excited for the Charge Spark match, actually. The Shanghai, New York, I'm very excited, but I want to see that. I want to see Spark Charge. I'm going to say that the Charge win. Spark win.
I would say the Spark win, and I would actually, this is going to be my crazy pick.
Bold prediction.
I would take the Spark over the Charge in the next matchup.
Okay.
I think with not having the hero bans, the Spark have shown a lot of depth with their support and DPS. Haven't seen much, out of the tanks. We've seen pretty much, the Orisa, Winston, Rhine, and I'd say we've probably seen more Zarya than Diva
Yeah.
from them. Those are really their four primary tanks, so we can kind of get predictions. With the DPS and the support, we can get any number of combinations, and I think one of the best combinations of Spark run is Baptiste Zen. And if you're going to give IDK Zen, I think he's going to win that matchup against Shu, and I think that's going to dictate the rest of the encounters, team fight wise, that they'll have. So I would take the Spark, and then between the Excelsior and the Dragons, I'm probably going to take MYXL.
Oh, weird.
Simply because we've seen rematches plenty of times where the NYXL have lost and they make the adjustments and they usually come back stronger.
Sure.
Saw it against the Atlanta Reign a lot. The Atlanta Reign was the one team last year that had them figured out.
Yeah, couldn't beat them.
And they lost to them twice in the regular season, but then when it came to the playoffs, NYXL just manhandled the Reign when it counted. And NYXL has always been one of those teams that they take these non-playoff, the additional tournaments just as seriously as they take the playoffs. So I would imagine they'd come in bringing their A game. And without the hero ban, where that would typically be a benefit to Shanghai, I think it presents a problem. Who are they going to run DPS wise? You've got four guys and all the heroes in the world to use.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you going to favor? And I think that while the coaches are up to that challenge, I think that's going to be a little more encumbersome upon the Shanghai Dragons than it will be for the NYXL, who will know, okay, Nene Libero, this combination, boom. SBB Libero, this combination, because those are their two most successful combinations. But in spite of it being Spark NYXL, it is not a lockdown on what the final would turn out to be.
Yeah, I think that's a really tough one. I think the Charge will beat the Spark.
Okay.
I think Shanghai will beat NYXL. I think that you are right in saying that they definitely come back a lot stronger against these teams. I just don't think that Shanghai. I don't think that I don't think they lose when it counts.
Yeah. And honestly, with those four teams being in the semifinals, I don't think you can go wrong with any one of your predictions.
Sure.
You could easily say Dragons Charge NYXL, Spark Dragons, Spark NYXL. I think those two semifinals can go truly either way, 3-2. I really think that those are matchups that are going to be very close because the Spark have always played Charge very well. But with the Charge's momentum, who knows what would come out with that? And we've already touched on the other.
I do think that if there was to be a Cinderella run, it's going to come from Seoul. I don't think that the Hunters or London, I give them very, very slim chances to win their match, but I could see the Seoul potentially beating the Spark and then also beating the Charge to get to the final match. And hopefully, it's NYXL or Shanghai that they play. That would be a better matchup. But for my finals, Shanghai versus Charge, this is a really, really tough one because this is the 1 and 2 in the league for me. I think, man, I'm going to say Shanghai because they've played very good teams. Charts have played a couple of the higher level teams here as well, including NYXL. I just think the Dragons have a better understanding of who they or what they can do, and I don't think it matters what the Charge play as. Shanghai is going to have a counter, so I think Shanghai is going to end up winning the Asia bracket.
For mine between the Spark and NYXL, I'm going to take NYXL, but everybody needs to be watching Godsby from the Spark if this matchup happens, because we saw Godsby dictate on Busan that entire first map. He dictated everything, and while every hero will be available for both teams, I think no matter what hero Godsby chooses, he is going to dictate a lot of the flanking action, which is going to dictate how the NYXL set up defense.
Mm-hmm.
And if he has his way again, we could see the Spark pull off what would be at that point. It would really be, even though they're the 3 and 4 seed, it would be an upset because it's NYXL. But I would take NYXL for the finals in this bracket. And I would love to see that matchup again because I really did, even though it was 3-1, enjoy that matchup because I liked what I saw out of Spark. And it was that first map was exciting. So I would like to see a match where it's pretty much that way the whole time.
Yeah, I can see that. Now, we aren't really able to predict the North America bracket because of how the knockout round and the qualification rounds are going. We don't know exactly what the matchups are going to be. But I just want you to tell me, without knowing who the matchups are going to be, who do you think? I mean, we know kind of the brackets a little bit. Who do you think ends up in the finals? And who do you think wins?
In the finals, now let me make sure that I'm looking at this correctly. In the finals for that side, I would say it'd be the Shock. And
I know.
well, my initial reaction is to say Shock Fusion.
Yeah. I
But
think that's everyone's.
with how the Mayhem have been playing, I mean, regardless of whether it's lesser teams or not, we've seen teams have a streak like theirs against lesser teams and then dominate the better teams, like San Francisco. San Francisco all last year, one of the best teams in the league, but their golden stage, they played a lot of primarily weaker teams like your Valiants, your Defiants. They played a lot of the guys who were weaker at that time, but then they went into the playoffs and just destroyed everybody all the way to the finals until Shanghai beat them. Oh no, I'm sorry. That was the rematch against the Titans was the golden stage. So if the Mayhem can duplicate that, I'd put Mayhem Shock, and that's honestly where I'm leaning. Obviously, I'm going to take the Shock. I see it being in the grand final of this melee. It will be, to me, the Shock and NYXL, and I think the Shock will end up winning.
Okay. I think that's fair. I'm very much hoping to see the Fusion and the Mayhem play each other. I think they've both had easier schedules. We have witnessed them beating these easier teams exactly how they should. And they have played some better teams and won. Even with the Mayhem, I mean, the Mayhem had a stretch. I mean, they played the bottom 5 teams, like four out of 5, I think. So they had easier stretches. I think that the Fusion are going to beat the Mayhem. I don't think that any of the bottom knockout rounds, I don't think that they make it past the any of the top 4, regardless of who wins. So I don't think any of that matters. I could potentially see Paris making a run. They would be my dark horse. If anyone was gonna make a run, it's gonna be them. I think that the Valiant are playing way too good to lose to the Shock. I think that they're gonna beat the Shock. I think the Fusion is going to beat the Mayhem.
Okay.
I think the Fusion is going to beat Valiant. And then I think Shanghai is going to beat the Fusion.
Okay.
So that's mine right now. But I don't know if they're playing cross at the end.
From what I understood, there's and they've had to go back and forth on this with how they continue to reshape these regions and things. Let me look and make sure.
Well, if they do,
We're not
I
missing
think
anything.
Shanghai wins the whole thing.
No, they are doing a cross.
Okay.
Because it says tournament overall is 40,000 because they have a specific set for the North American bracket
right
before they meet up.
Okay.
So.
All right. Well, good sir. That's all I had for you.
And that's really all I had for you. I mean, you can only bring so much when you're low on It's been a day,
Yeah.
as we both
Well,
said.
it's
But
been a day, and we went a little bit longer than we have. This was this was
we have.
almost 2 episodes. So you're welcome to the people that are listening.
And thank you for bearing with us while we struggled with, again, just how the day beat us, but we weren't going to let people down. We were going to bring the best content that we could
We're
just for you
winning the
guys.
night. We
Just
lost
for
the
you
day,
guys.
but we're winning the night.
Yup.
Now we are gonna get off here and play some Overwatch.
Hmm.
And I think next week, I know we're a little bit late this week on Wednesday. Next week we should be back to Tuesday or
Hopefully, it depends on how
okay.
the work schedule turns
So
out.
Tuesday or Wednesday we will go over the May Melee and exactly how it went down, and I'm sure that there is going to be something that we got wrong considering how crazy this year has been. So stay tuned for that. And well, that's about enough of that.